Meaning. By Rick Delmonico. Meaning is a dance at the edge of chaos. Meaning is a nested hierarchy of metaphors. Information may appear in a digital form, but meaning never does. Meaning is never static. We are co-authors in a story that is still being written. If we are constructing our own illusions, we may not get to choose how real they seem. Most of what we observe is a nested hierarchy of behaviors. The deeper the hierarchy, the more nuanced. The small child sees the world through an unfiltered lens but does not understand it. The adult sees the world through the many layers of filters he has collected or have been forced upon him, and whatever meaning remains he convinces himself, it is truth. The universe is made of information. There is an organizational principle or process at work in the cosmos. Information has energy, and in terms of its potential, meaning, value and novelty play a role. Matter is the medium of expression, and the energy is stated as mass times the speed of light squared. For information, the value or the energy is measured as a truth value over all possible applications of expression. The higher the truth value, the more it applies. An idea whose time has come has energy. The idea that knowledge is power must include the energy contained in truth over application, and novelty over value. Novelty emerges from the foundation of understanding. Novelty without understanding is not meaningful. How is meaning stored in state space? Meaning is intimately associated with the eternal now. Meaning in the past could only be fixed by its value in the now and is not static. Memories of the past fluctuate for every creature, with any useful meaning being measured against possibilities in the future. Meaning in the future is connected to the now in such a way that the set of possibilities is always constrained by previous associations, and as the dimensions increase, the possibilities increase exponentially. The more distinctions associated with a particular concept, the more constrained. The meaning of words is not stable but scale dependent. Over vast periods of time, meaning changes along with all of the words in use, as a collection of interrelated elements. If science is to have any chance of grasping the nature of reality, it must first solve the question of how the universe wound itself up through random processes. Our inability to describe reality results in paradoxes, which are clues that we are not thinking far enough outside of the box. Dark matter, and dark energy, are carefully veiled manifestations of metaphysical properties, couched in the language of materialism. We are trying to describe chaotic behavior using logic and reason. We are weaving images, or models, which are the integration of ideas, into a tapestry of meaning. Why systems thinking is the right approach. Systemic phenomena cannot be reduced to their constituent parts. Theses are emergent behaviors that must be understood before they can be addressed. First there is meaning, next would be relationships, and finally context, story, actors, and stage. The geometry and dimensions are some variation of emergent properties, repeated at all scales. We can say that nature has an intent that creates the actors. The behavior at one scale is dependent on the scales below it, and creates context. Process starts with intent. It is our actions that define us. In an infinite probability space, our action encodes meaningful information into an intentional field of implicate order. This is the manifestation of events from some degree of possibility, depending on your position in the fractal structure. There is variation in probabilities because the interconnectedness of the fractal structure has variation. This is like saying the computation is dependent upon the position in the computational geometry, or in human terms it describes a range of behaviors, reinforced by repeated actions, variation in the density of a probability wave. The more an action is repeated, the greater the density. Intent, process, and perception as a key principle of reality. All particles have a form of awareness, an exchange of information. In the hierarchy of this process, consciousness emerges. Living systems concentrate order from their environment, leaving a ripple of disorder in their wake. As order emerges in the living system, a proportional amount of disorder is also created. This has something to do with meaning. When we attend a moment, we give it value as a consequence of memory, and when we place intention upon it, the value fluctuates as it branches out into the future as possibilities. The value or quality of information in time has everything to do with meaning. If the universe is made of information, then we are moving from a state of profound truth to a state of meaningless gibberish. The past and the future collide, a series of moments, a continuum of the impossible becoming possible. The coalescing of fractions of meaning and metaphor, building a stage for a story where the actors repeat their lines with increasing precision. In the spiritual realm, truth has perfect symmetry. It looks the same from every angle, at every scale. In the material realm, truth fluctuates everywhere we find it. So we must look beyond the information to the agenda. There is always an agenda. The agenda is tied to a belief system. Belief systems are filters. The purity of truth never survives these filters. Truth is the core of reality. As information, it has the most potential and the most symmetry. Self-organization occurs at the boundaries of chaotic systems. The outer boundary has the most variation or degrees of freedom, and the least significance, in terms of meaning. Transforming the message, retaining relationships in a fluctuating context. Fractal information and the dissolution of meaning, islands of order in a sea of chaos. Static truth versus dynamic variation. A collective principle of organization, a relationship of measured things, that give rise to a law. Is meaning scale invariant? The meaning contained in symbols has an influence on the group/think, there is an energy contained in meaning, a dynamic tension. Our focus flows like a piece of music between tension and release. It travels across the fitness landscape, driven by our beliefs and values. There is a dimensionality to this landscape, a multidimensional polarity that does not necessarily favor good outcomes. Reaching a fitness peak requires more effort than rolling into an attractor basin. Everything is an approximation of something else, and so we must begin to understand the deeper meaning of these fluctuating properties. If meaning is always fluctuating, then we do not ever really see truth. What we see are truth values. In the example of the coin tosses, we have a resolution that gives us a value something like, yes, that is definitely heads. But if the time scales are very small, we can't see the result of the toss long enough for it to register, and if the scales are very large, we would not live long enough to see the result of the toss. We appear to be right in the middle of these scales. Is this a coincidence? The block universe and time. Determinism and emergence. Meaning and variation. Holograms and fractals. Resolution and scale. Relationships and context. The pilgrim and the journey. Truth and chaos. Darkness and light. These are the currency of understanding. If the nature of reality is consciousness, then there are no perfect symmetries, there is no pure randomness. We are in the gray region between truth and uncertainty. These extremes can only be ideals, not reality. Process only occurs in the gray region, time does not exist at the extremes. If we think of coin tosses, with truth, the coin is either heads or tails as a frozen expression of meaning, and with randomness the coin is always both, it never stops spinning, and contains no meaning. The dynamic tension between the two is where time comes from. Either spin is imparted to truth or the perfect randomness of the perpetual spin symmetry is broken. At each extreme is a different form of symmetry, one is a symmetry in the relationship of meaning and the other is a symmetry of potential. Meaning is never static, we are co-authors in a story that is still being written. Information is energy, time is constructed through the process of novelty. Potential is created by the difference between two or more things. This is a relationship of dynamic tension, just like music. Meaning and understanding are qualities of the process of moving from profound truth to meaningless gibberish. The quality of the information can be in its truth value or its ability to create a novel and meaningful variation. The second law of thermodynamics says that most of the time the value will go down, unless there is a control mechanism in place like fitness in the fitness landscape. Truth as the source of all things, branches out into the darkness of uncertainty in a fractal pattern. It carries with it profound meaning that is expressed in every nuance generated in the fractal computation. As this process is continued, more and more meaning is lost, until the variation reaches its maximum. At the extreme end of this process is pure randomness, darkness, or the abyss. Sometime back in the 90s, musical instrument manufacturers realized that the drum machines they were making did not sound natural. Their solution was to create human feel. This is simply a randomization of the volume and the timing of each sound bite that is generated. The user is able to select how much randomness is programmed into the composition, and it is the randomness that make the composition sound more human. However, this is still a long way from creating emotion. Emotion has a form of randomness, but it is a spontaneous expression of meaning. There is meaning of a higher order contained in this somewhat random expression. The emotion cannot be created without consciousness. Why are we here? The simple answer, the universe is trying to comprehend itself. The complicated answer, the universe has an intent and a purpose, but we cannot say exactly what the intent or purpose might be. Reality is like an onion with a tree growing inside it. The onion is a model of the probability space where the tree of the knowledge, our material reality, is growing. Each layer gets progressively thinner, so that, like a fractal, it never completely fills space, the space is not infinite. The boundary conditions display edge of criticality in each layer. The physical manifestation, the structure of our reality, could be thought of as a tree-like structure, growing in this probability space. At the ends, the filaments are very fine, in fact infinitely fine. All of the information is stored as relationships, and as the finest projections are created or computed, you have the greatest number of possible outcomes, so that the earliest versions of this structure had few possible outcomes, less degrees of freedom. This structure could be called truth at its core, in the beginning, and chaos in the fine hair-like projections, the end. The ever-present now, is our position in the computational geometry. Buridan's S, deception, metastability, dithering, or self-referential randomness. Fredkin's paradox and degrees of freedom. The growing multilayer onion with a fractal tree inside of it is a frozen expression of meaning. A better model might be something like a torus version of this structure. This structure is a variation on the block universe, which is a static model of space/time. When we try to add spin or torsion to this model, things get complicated. The fractal structure is the differentiation of the previous level, in time, space, spin, information, meaning, and relationships. These multidimensional aspects are always moving from more to less symmetry and from coarse to fine scales. Organizational structures and self-referential noise, the fitness landscape requires balance. As the system matures, it goes through stages, often moving from a competitive environment to a cooperative environment with agents forming a range of associations. If the stakes are high enough and the complexity is rich enough, you will get very sudden cascades from chaotic attractors. The fitness peaks will become steeper and the whole landscape may become very extended in the vertical axis. At some point an avalanche of monumental proportions will be produced. This is what extinction level events are. Sound carries information, but sound is not substance, it is a variation of relationships. The information is not static, it has a dynamic of meaning, an expression from another place and time. The unity of infinity is a jewel. The unfolding of the facets is a differentiation of meaning, a material expression or experience. We are supposed to understand, to grow and learn, to seek out meaning and return it to the source. This results in a variation of the quality or value of the meaning as we understand it. It is an imperfect or human quality. Imperfection is allowed to express itself as possibilities within a matrix of material expressions. We filter the information for value, but this process is imperfect. It has a fuzzy quality. This is because of the information density, otherwise we would suffer cognitive overload. There must be a practical limit to the digits of precision in the computational geometry of the system as it relates to a particular scale. Scale and resolution move together, and all that we can see or measure is a change in the relationships. We are a material expression at a particular resolution and a particular scale. Cognitive overload has something to do with the digits of precision. When we include the dynamics of scale, singularities and digital horizons disappear. The asymmetry is our carving out our own niche in this material world, and the symmetry is our connecting to the source of all meaning. The source is a pure state of being, or what I will call truth or God. You might wonder, is God the source of evil? To which I would say no, not possible. If you are thinking this, you don't understand the concept. Truth is the highest energy state of the system. Truth is branching out into the nothingness as possibilities. We are in the gray region between truth and uncertainty. How can infinity be bounded into a finite or unitary space? There is only one way, as a fractal. The material expression of our physical reality is, in a sense, a grand version of Chinese whispers. Can immortality be achieved by controlling the rules or laws that govern the variation of relationships? How can we save our memories? What is the best way to store information? To have a continuity of consciousness requires precise relationships. At what level would the variation cease? Could the variation cycle? Could each cycle present a slightly new version of these relationships and still retain continuity? What would we become over vast amounts of time? Only a perfect law could control the variation, to create the most meaning and the most value. Our extension in space and time has a nebulous quality. It is not precise or discrete. We are in a sense a reflection of the universe itself, such that, we connect in ways that are fuzzy and discontinuous. This is not causation, the dynamics are nonlinear, resulting in emergent features that are as unpredictable as the weather. Even explanation is subject to entropy. The best explanation is an explanation that doesn't require further explanation. The geometry of explanation is fractal. Explanation is a dynamic network of relationships. There is no reason to assume that the universe is irrational, therefore, it is incomplete. Even using the best math we have, we cannot prove anything with complete certainty. What we see are relationships that are either precise or have fluctuation. I suspect that as we move to finer and finer scales, everything fluctuates, even these precise relationships. I do not bear the burden of proof. All of humanity is exploring the possible solutions to this puzzle, nature of reality, and so far, all we have done is generate more questions, but it is the questions that matter. There is no universal understanding. You can gauge your level of understanding by the number of paradoxes it generates. DNA is a transmission from the realm of information into our realm, the material world. This transmission contains both meaningful information and self-referential randomness, a form of dithering, and it is the relationship of expression or semantics that creates the meaning. The value of the message will reposition the organism in the fitness landscape. This is a dance of meaningful expression. The fluctuation of permanence in the transmission of genetic information is context dependent. The environment imposes constraints on the variation of gene expression. The organism settles into a location in the fitness landscape, however, this landscape is dynamic and the location is part of an attractor basin. Architect, just how long do you think this piece is going to last? Oracle, as long as it can. The ability to reason out whether something is true or false follows the idea of power and control. While it is desirable to believe that we possess power, this is an illusion. what we have are degrees of freedom in a field of information, and the resolution gives us the degrees of freedom, along with our position in the computation or landscape. We can say that a musical passage has more meaning than some other passage, but we cannot say that one passage is true and another is false. There is no excluded middle. If an axiom is both true and false, then it is at the extreme end of the continuum between truth and randomness. In other words, the coin is not heads or tails because it is always spinning, or the time scale is so large that we will never see the result of the coin toss. The universe is the transmission of a message. The message is some form of a story, the hero's journey. The purpose is some form of a harvest. This harvest is in the form of information. The information has value and meaning. The value and meaning are context dependent. The dynamics involved drive the process. It is the difference between truth and randomness. These two extremes are ideals, not reality as we think of it. Static truth has no meaning unless we can perceive it. This requires a dynamic. At the other extreme, randomness, all meaning is lost. Matter is, in a sense, a condensation of energy. This energy is the dynamic. If information is the source of all things, then we too are, in a sense, a condensation of information in transmission. This transmission is the dynamic. We are co-authors in a story that is still being written. Because the quality of relationships in any system varies, we cannot treat an infinite series of any kind in the same manner as a finite series. If I am adding an infinite number of pennies to a jar, as the jar fills, the relationships fluctuate, and so the idea of adding an infinite number of pennies, one at a time, must include a system to which the next number is added. If an abstract system could contain an infinite series, would the quality of the relationships in the system change? Time would be another example of a system that must change. With each tick of time, if the system didn't change, then the notion of time becomes meaningless. The linear progression of a fractal system is an illusion. We superimpose a linear logical structure to a chaotic system, and what comes out is paradoxes and approximations. Computational geometry and the translation of meaning across domains. I am not looking for the answers, I'm looking for the questions. The consciousness of humanity is networked together in a domain that we do not have direct access to. Information has many qualities such as velocity, density, etc., but meaning is always a network of relationships. Metaphors give substance to abstractions. A great idea has energy. The idea branches out into the landscape and is absorbed by the actors. As this happens, the idea gains momentum and expression. A really great idea can have so much energy that it becomes unstoppable. There is only one question. What is the idea? If a system is sufficiently complex, all we can do is tweak the parameters, run it in real time, and watch what happens. Immortality does not necessarily need to be static, but it must include some form of harmonious relationship. Did God have a choice in creating the universe? If he took a static law which is perfect and applied a dynamic principle to it, this generating set would create meaning and values that are precise, and in the end would not be a zero-sum game. Emergent relationships and the differentiation of meaning in nested hierarchies. Truth as a precise relationship in a dynamic system. General relativity in state space. Is gravity behaving like a strange attractor in state space? At every level of the fractal hierarchy, variation enters the system in different ways, so there is no scale invariance. All of the information is stored in the relationships of and in each level in the computational geometry. You are spirit. You are made of stuff, but the stuff is something that cannot be regarded as real. The information is not the structure, it is the relationships. The information contains no mass. If we had unlimited knowledge, how would we store it? As we add information to a system, the relationships in the system change, so that the system itself is the storage medium. The differentiation of meaning moves from logical to illogical, from precise relationships to imprecise relationships. This is a dynamic expression, driven by the difference between truth and randomness. Every particle in the universe knows where every other particle is instantaneously. A random walk is an exploration of state space. A quantum random walk is an exploration that is not constrained by space and time. The idea of truth is still, to this day, a controversial topic. Truth cannot be separated from meaning. Meaning is context dependent, and so the relationships become important. The dynamics include consistency vs inconsistency, universal agreement vs disagreement, objective vs subjective, etc. It is this dynamic quality that causes variation in the meaning. No matter what we say, about any sensory input or idea we attempt to convey, the information will lose some of its truth value during transmission. Any attempt to remove the dynamics or context, will also alter the meaning. A left-brained, dogmatic, pragmatist, will always try to treat truth in black and white terms. This is the idea of determinism, that everything is absolute, but what we find is that nothing is absolute, everything has variation that is scale dependent, and it is the resolution that determines how much variation we are able to detect. A belief system is often based on a relationship. Someone you respect or admire sold you an idea so that, you have an investment in the idea. Whatever this belief system is, it filters your perception of reality. Innocence, from my understanding, is unfiltered perception. A belief system is unnecessary. Our choices affect the degrees of freedom for all future choices. The main purpose of the rational mind is to live long enough to make a copy of itself. How romantic. Determinism or indeterminism. As with so many things, it is probably not one or the other. I think it is more like something akin to degrees of freedom, so that free will has variation, not absolutes. The idea would be, a choice you make now will affect the degrees of freedom for your next choice. Love is a dance of complementary expression, there is movement, a sweeping away of differentiation. Over enough time you will take on many of the mannerism of the one you love. The reason science can't describe reality is the same reason it can't describe a tree. You can draw a picture of a tree, or take a picture, make a movie, even a 3D movie, but in the end you only have a partial description no matter how much information you use. Science is in the business of explaining things, but the explanations will always be incomplete. Even if the greatest master in music theory gave the most complete analysis of a piece of music, he could only describe certain aspects. Much better to just listen to the piece of music and let it touch you, move you, and carry you away. It is possible to overthink almost any subject, and by the time you are finished overanalyzing it, you have a different animal. The value of simple is clarity, the value of clarity is practical application. If you want to apply a principle to your life, keep it simple, stupid. In our quest for knowledge, it seems strange, just how dynamic this exploration is becoming. We should ask ourselves, first of all, what is knowable, and secondly, of the things we are able to understand, just how well can we know them? We have entered the information age. Knowledge is doubling in faster and faster cycle times, but as you may have noticed on the internet, not having all the facts does not seem to stop people from having opinions. These opinions create a field, like the wisdom of the crowd. The truthfulness fluctuates, but when we average it out, many times, it is very close to the correct interpretation. Are we influencing the outcome? This would suggest that something like the intentional field of implicate order is in play here. There was some form of probability distribution. We were each given a space in time, in position, and duration. We were each given a particular set of talents and resources, mental and physical ability, social position, etc. If a system is sufficiently complex, all we can do is tweak the parameters, run it in real time, and watch what happens. There is something we are supposed to learn. Don't give up before the miracle happens. There is a miracle, and just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. When an atheist has been humbled, he calls himself an agnostic. A fundamental feature of the intentional field of implicate order is deception. All intelligent agencies use deception as a tool for an agenda. This is a clue. The reality we perceive has deception built into it. It is being called self-referential noise. This is the snow on your TV, the hiss on your radio. It is the abyss, the negative energy in information theory. It is the beautiful lie, and it is driving the system. Our perception is filtered. We differentiate the elements in our field of awareness. We reconstruct these elements in novel ways. This is what imagination is. Intuition is a higher form of awareness, however there appears to be a large amount of background noise so that we cannot really get a clear picture of what is going on. This reminds me of opinions. Everyone has intuition, and just like opinions, there is a lot of fluctuation. People believe what they want to believe. People hear what they want to hear. Don't waste your time defending truth. Truth doesn't need your help. There is no surer way to hinder discovery than to believe that you already have the answer. Perception is, in a very real sense, an awareness of differentiation. Women and men are different for a reason. You have to look beyond the physical realm to really understand what is going on. Women complete men and men complete women. If we blur all of the lines, we will end up with a compromised level of awareness. Any sufficiently low level of awareness is indistinguishable from ignorance. Meaning has a dynamic, a thickness or density, as well as a network of connections, so it will fluctuate from person to person, creating a range of expressions as it spills into the landscape. You should be humbled by the great mysteries set before you. Arrogance is not useful in this matter. It's really not all that difficult to notice the deception built into our reality. What is hard to figure out is whether we are somehow involved. There may be a conceptual propagation of manifestations. In the spiritual realm, light creates and darkness copies, because darkness only has access to the shadows. It is impossible for men to look upon each other as equals. There is always tension because of ambition and desire. When a man does not know what drives him, he goes about painting the world with his own unique palette of colors, convinced that the ones he has chosen are correct and it is everyone else that is wrong. People forget that technology is a form of magic. I will let this sink in for a moment. There will be things in the future that are mundane to our progeny but to us are unimaginable. We are only beginning this journey of discovery. This idea that science is going to wipe away religion, little by little, error by error, is ridiculous. Science and religion contain an equal amount of error, and the illusion of superiority has made it difficult to make any real progress in either discipline. Reality is a nested hierarchy of relationships. We can only measure a thing in relationship to other things. Light does not experience time, only the system experiences time. The material world as we think of it, is made of information. This information is not stored in the material, it is stored in the relationships. The nested hierarchy of scale is an infinite series of relationships. It is the vanishing point, the squaring of the circle, irrational numbers, Cantor dust, etc. We are constrained to the relationships in our frame of reference, and when we try to move into these far distant domains, we always encounter a paradox. When we move to the largest scales, we encounter the miracle of something from nothing, and when we move to the finest scales, we encounter the mystery of the quantum domain. Isaac Newton advanced our understanding of physics, but his concept of space/time was static or rigid. Einstein advanced our understanding a little further, but his concept of scale was static or rigid. Probably, it will turn out that nothing is static, and that the collective principle of organization takes advantage of processes on many levels and in ways that are for us, at this time, unimaginable. Gödel's incompleteness theorem is a statement about the absurdity of reason. If an axiom can be both true and false, then it lies quite literally outside the bounds of reason. Nature is lazy, it likes to copy. This is a fractal probability distribution. The Euthyphro problem and possible solution, logic has a fractal quality to it. Truth is the highest energy state of the system. The lawful regularities of our physical reality are emergent. Truth is branching out into the nothingness as possibilities. Truth has the most potential, and uncertainty has the most variation. We are in the gray region between truth and uncertainty. All behaviors are constrained by the relationships in their reference frame. All we have are the relationship of measured things and incomplete descriptions. Why anything with mass can't move at the speed of light? Mass bends the space/time around it, and the faster it moves, the more it bends space/time. At the speed of light, this bending reaches the theoretical limits. So why is every electron exactly the same? Richard Feynman thought maybe there was only one electron, but it is possible that the electron is a precise relationship of something more fundamental. The greater good has been defined as the ends justify the means. The common good says that liberty resides in the means. The hollow movement and process, the undivided whole, is differentiated by perception. This creates a disturbance in the field. The disturbance is information, but it is different, new, or novel because of imprecise perception and intention. Perceptions are always a best guess or controlled hallucination. From this information, intention is formed in the form of an echo from a previous intent, but again this is an approximation to some degree of resolution. Expression and experience move together in and out of these nested hierarchies, creating new or novel information. The geometry involved is a novelty or imagination engine. The universe is a pencil standing on its tip, and if time does not flow, the pencil will remain like this forever. This is the highest energy state for the pencil. When the pencil falls, it picks a direction randomly. However, what is the relationship of one direction over another? The relationships only begin as the pencil starts falling. The movement could be called the hollow movement of David Bohm, and when the pencil has completely stopped moving, the universe has entered a heat death. Quantum uncertainty is always creating novel relationships to some degree of resolution. This is the dance of expression/experience. Self-referential noise is the fiddler. Truth is precise associations without fluctuation, but everything is fluctuating, and so, we only see truth values. The degree of precision is important in that it gives us the applicability of any truth value. Everything that comes into your five senses is an approximation of reality, and its applicability is a measure of its truth value. Applicability is a material expression of process. The explanatory power of math isn't always precise because of applicability. If it doesn't apply, it isn't true. Penrose tiling, the plane we are tiling is not only extended into the third dimension, it is also dynamic, fourth dimension, and if it is fractal, the dimensions continue into state space. With the measurement problem, when we have the particle's location, we are in a sense stopping time, but the electron is part of the hollow movement, and so a slice of time yields a partial or incomplete picture of the hollow movement. If we think of a holographic plate, the electron is everywhere on the plate, and it is our particular vantage point when viewing the plate that gives it location. Perception creates a differentiation. Reality is constructed by emergent phenomena. Think of the holographic plate as a dynamic system rather than a static plate. The plate is one slice of time. As a system, the structure is nothing like a plate, it is more like sound waves moving as spherical ripples in time. There must be some form of a container with everything inside of the container affecting everything else to some degree. Information and awareness in a system, the system as a whole has a complete awareness of itself. Perception creates differentiation, the differentiation divides the awareness. This process is, in a sense, a division of consciousness. The meaning contained in the system is moving from the highest state of application, through nested hierarchies of meaning and association, into a realm of imagination where all things are possible but less and less meaningful. The singularity is a point, but a point is a theoretical object. When a photon interacts with a photographic plate, the location of the photon is a combination of its wave amplitude and the position of the plate, creating an artificial slice of time. This illusion of location is no different than the illusion of complete information about the photon. This photon may have come from a star a billion light years away, but it is everywhere. The interference pattern from the two-slit experiment shows bright bands and dark bands, and it is the dark bands that are the most interesting, because the dark bands are not empty. That would be like saying that some part of the wave does not exhibit any behavior. The mathematician is trained to see the world a certain way, and so he can become very myopic. The scope of vision required to see the world as a dynamic integrated whole might be more along the lines of a poet's perspective. Perception creates differentiation, and it is the act of perceiving that narrows or broadens the scope. An imagination engine cycle would look something like perception, intent, action, expression. So maybe you could call it a four-stroke engine. Intention is an echo of a previous intent. The brain maps motor control in the same manner that the universe itself maps the material in it. A particular movement will have a location of highest probability/density in a region of the cortex, and yet the ability is also present as a distribution in the surrounding cortex, although not as precise. The value of uncertainty is novelty. Deception is an ever-present, pervasive influence on the social fabric, generating illusions and expressions that mystify and bewilder. Most do not understand what they are looking at, or simply ignore the ramifications, that we are somehow involved in our own deception. There can be no magic without the magician. These material expressions are the result of intent, which is an echo of a previous intent. We need to consider the nature of information. Things like meaning and relationships, along with any value or application within a context. Also, the material world might be all there is, or it might be an expression of something more fundamental. Immortality would require precise relationships. Any variation would need to be constrained by a perfect law that retains the form or relationship so that randomness is never allowed to reign. I think the energy comes from the difference between randomness and precise relationships in some way, so we would need a different engine. At the end of the day, all we have are the relationship of measured things and incomplete explanations. Science is divided into the empirical and the forensic, and as it turns out, both are limited to some degree of resolution. How can action occur on a hologram? The hologram stores information that is updated by behavior. It is the behavior that has location. The information about a particular particle is stored everywhere. When a behavior occurs, the information is updated everywhere. If all of the information stored in the universe is stored as relationships, then meaning becomes an essential component and truth is relational. If it doesn't apply, it isn't true. When the philosopher makes a statement that can be both true and false, he should realize that the statement has no application. He is not being clever, nor is he being wise. A pointless pursuit is always pointless. Thus we should simplify for clarity and application. Simpler is almost always closer to truth. Additional note, we are talking about a hologram with a fractal probability distribution, so even logic, fuzzy, has a fractal quality to it. Explanations can be in the form of nested hierarchies. In the end, all we have are the relationship of measured things and incomplete descriptions. The purpose of the universe may be to harvest the meaningful information that lies in the region between simple truth and chaotic, meaningless gibberish. I think this information has more to do with action than thought. Right action is measured in the heart of every man. His skill in determining right action will vary from man to man. The consequences ripple through history, sometimes in a smooth, calm fashion and sometimes as a tumultuous storm. A perfectly symmetrical, in terms of relationships, input of sensory data would essentially be random noise with no differentiation from any of your senses. So, we could say that perception creates a differentiation, and all sufficiently complex events are statistically impossible, they are all one-time events. In assuming this, we must add the degrees of precision the brain will use to process the data. Next, the brain will add expectation values to the data to create a best guess, and voila, you have cognition. Since all sufficiently complex events are statistically impossible, does cognition round off the statistical impossibility of a complex event? If we are in a simulation, there might be processing limitations involved. The symmetry of the potential of the boundary condition of time has a fractal quality such that the forward direction of time does not mirror the reverse direction of time. This difference gives a behavior that we think of as acceleration or gravity. The symmetry of the potential of the boundary condition of time varies with scale and resolution. So we should expect these behaviors to follow a power scaling law in some manner. These behaviors are constrained by the relationships in their reference frame, so the difference between forward time and reverse time varies with the reference frame. We can say that a behavior has location, but we cannot say exactly what an electron or a photon is, other than the fact that it has a very precise relationship in some form of a network. The human race is a collection of memories about the shared experiences of each one of us as a network of associations branching back all the way through history. These memories are very much like a great symphony with its triumphs and tragedies. If the great composer had chosen a different method to compose his symphony, we would have ended up with a different symphony. When desire sleeps it is but a subtle influence, when desire awakens, it drives the world and everything in it in ways that are too sublime and terrible to imagine. Mostly, anything intangible is profoundly absurd. Our perception becomes increasingly filtered over time. This is the opposite of innocence. Our only chance at discovery is to nurture imagination. Reason is the servant of all of the higher levels of awareness. No aha moment is ever the product of pure reason. Nothing can harm you, you have nothing to worry about, nothing will happen. Sounds good, yes. This thing we call nothing is the outer darkness of the great beyond, and is in a sense nonsense. Question everything. Now is a mirror precisely positioned between the past and the future, and it is reflecting in both directions. The surface of this mirror has imperfections, and so the reflections cannot faithfully match either the past or the future. There is always a slight variation. The randomness imposed by the imperfections has a fractal quality with extreme sensitivity to initial conditions. It is not the mirror that is moving, it is the imperfections. In an infinite probability space, does mixing metaphors matter? A concept will last only as long as someone is available and willing to understand it. Dreams have substance, but the substance is different than the substance of the material realm. Your belief systems filter and your spirit creates connections, and it is these connections that are in play when you use your intuition. The more precisely we can divide time, the more precisely we can measure distance. This is true for surveying and navigation. The fractal mirror of time is a kaleidoscope, the jewel at the heart of physics. What the precisions are I cannot say. Perhaps it is ratios. A rock does not need information to tell it how to be a rock. That is not how information works. The information is stored in the relationships that make up the rock. If the relationships were different, the rock would be different. We can rearrange the relationships of many things at many levels. If we scramble the relationships, what happens to the information? Sheldrake would suggest that new relationships, something the universe has never seen before, are resisted by some form of energy, morphic field, but as the arrangement becomes more common, at some point it becomes easier to produce. Everything is fields. If we are in a simulation, it is pointless to talk about the arrangement of the pixels on the screen. A computational mapping of possibilities is linked to a system that measures value and meaning against effort and application. The geometry includes nested hierarchies, an interconnected network of associations, and the one thing that keeps the processes from locking up, self-referential noise. If the universe is a decision engine using pseudo-randomness to keep the computations from locking up, then we could ask, what is the purpose, or what is it trying to solve? Also, what is happening to the information as the process matures? What we are talking about is informed random walks in state space, like wisdom of the crowd. This involves fields that we have yet to identify. When you include the quantum domain, then you are talking about quantum random walks that are not constrained by space and time. The particle/wave duality has something to do with the nature of time. Time is intimately linked to information, you cannot separate them. Information moving in time always contains meaning. This meaning has a truth value. There is a dynamic nature to these truth values with application and material expressions. Experience relies on these expressions, it is the perception or division of the expression that creates the experience. How much we are able to understand varies from experience to experience. In the quantum world, these expressions have a probability. A fractal probability distribution. The holographic theory says that we are in two places at once. One of these places is a projection and it is essentially nowhere, and the other one is the hologram, which is essentially everywhere. You are smeared across the entire surface, so you could say that you are in that space between nowhere and everywhere. On a hologram, scale would be irrelevant. What would matter are things like the relationship of frequencies, patterns of interference and non-interference, etc. How could fields be generated on a hologram? A hologram stores information. This information is relational, the relationships describe the field, these fields are dynamic. So, does the surface of the hologram have extension into another dimension in space or in time? If this surface is dancing, the fiddler is self-referential noise. Truth is not inside of time, time is inside of truth. Truth is not inside of process, process is inside of truth. In terms of information, truth appears to be the most fundamental thing. Truth has the most symmetry, it looks the same from every angle, at every scale, and no one can prove the statement is incorrect. If the universe is holographic with a fractal feature such as experience and expression, fractal folding back into the hologram, then our understanding of scale needs to be drastically modified. To describe the fractal folding of information, if you have enough information to ask a pertinent question, you have enough information to answer it. Physics is a form of magic. No physics textbook remains relevant for more than 10 years. The physicist is the new wizard, it is a dark magic. We are children playing with nuclear fire. To find out what is really going on in the world, you have to take in information from as many different sources as possible, average it all out, down to an approximation, and hopefully, you will be in close proximity to the answer. This is wisdom of the crowd, but it only works with an informed source. Nature is lazy, it likes to copy. Darkness is the same, it copies. Darkness needs the light, it is using us for an agenda. We are made in the image of God, and our imagination is of such a great value, that we have the attention of these dark creatures. Everything is happening at the edges of the shadow, this fractal boundary. The gray region, the border between darkness and light, sense and nonsense, order and randomness, the ever-present now. This is a computational geometry that generates meaning. I will use a manufacturing company as a metaphor to describe our reality. When we look at a company, there are many things going on. The less you understand it, the more chaotic it looks. The behaviors are both a consensus of the actors and a set of individual goals and depend on what the actor is connected to. Some behaviors will be very simple, push a button every hour, and the actor can be changed with no measurable difference, to some degree of resolution. Other behaviors are so complex that even if all the actors and all the other factors are the same, you will see a noticeable difference in behavior that cannot be predicted. Profit occurs in many layers and exists in the system in more than one way and in a sense, has a hierarchy. Profit to individuals, to teams, to the company as a whole. You could say that all profit is equal, but some profits are more equal than others. In a sense, profit and value are the same, and the system is healthiest when the value is maximized throughout the hierarchy. Novelty plays a key role in shaping the behaviors that emerge from the actors. This novelty comes from imagination. The value is intimately linked to meaning. If it doesn't apply, it doesn't have meaning. Life is a sustainable system of organization, using fields to retain a specific form. Microtubules read the field, inform and organize the material in the system. The material is an expression of the field. This field of information has potential, the potential is generating meaning or value. It appears to be coming from the spiritual realm. Now is a position in a fractal structure, which is essentially a computational structure and is the interface between the past and the future. It is the fractal folding and unfolding of information. The surface or interface has very slight variations that cause the information's dynamic, like a processor. If now is like a mirror, then the past informs the future and vice versa. If it is more like a window, then the future spills into the past with subtle variations that can never be predicted beyond some degree of resolution. The idea that everything can be computed and everything can be explained is flawed. The dynamics of the system do not allow for completeness. Partial descriptions will always be the norm. Truth as a logic structure is closer to simple, and the further away from simple you get, the deeper and more nuanced an explanation will become, until you reach a point where the energy is so high that no explanation is possible. The density of time, cognitive overload, and stress. There is a principle of balance. Humans are designed to experience life's ebb and flows. You cannot spend all of your time at the high end of the spectrum. Make time for everything in moderation. The reason you don't remember tomorrow is because your journey is unique. If you could remember tomorrow, it wouldn't be unique. The reason you can't change the past is because you wouldn't learn from your mistakes. If you could change the past, there wouldn't be any mistakes. Truth is about meaning and application. It is also about getting your head, heart, and feet all moving in the same direction. What we value matters, and the more we understand, the more alive we are. What we think of as a particle is a packet of energy that can combine or interface with the environment in some way. The behavior has location, but we cannot say whether the material, particle, has location. The material could in fact just be an illusion caused by our incomplete understanding. The human brain is a fractal antenna that could in fact be reading fields that we don't even know about. These fields, if they exist, would be quantum in nature. As an example, migrating birds, photosynthesis, and quantum random walks in state space. Beauty is a curious mix of geometry and randomness and is perceived more by the heart than the head. Backward causation might be better explained as read ahead. A fractal probability distribution is not purely random, it is complex and chaotic, but not purely random. Nothing is. Every engine takes advantage of a difference. The definition of definitions is an infinite network of associations. In an infinite probability space, all behavior is possible, but not all behavior is expedient. Inside the Mandelbrot set is the non-computable region. The region is finite, but the boundary is infinite. There is a bifurcation of expression. Everything inside the infinite boundary is part of the set, and everything outside of the boundary escapes and is thrown into the outer darkness. The number of behaviors that can be contained in a region of space is proportional to the force of gravity in that region. It is the folding of information into a region of space that contains a holographic horizon where all of the information is stored, but because the horizon is colliding with other horizons, the information is mixing and becoming entangled. How much of the original form remains depends on the fields involved. The singularity or folding of information into a maximum compression generates another behavior, possibly spin. The event horizon is evidence of maximum compression. When we talk about isolated event horizons, we are referring to a particular time scale. At the scale of galaxies, very long time scales are involved, and at the scale of atoms, time scales and isolation are very much shorter. A very clever lawyer can create a lot of damage. We can only hope that lawyers never figure out how to manipulate physical law. The particle zoo and behavior. We are cataloging behaviors. In the quantum realm, there is a minimum amount of space, time, energy, or behavior, and as these behaviors combine, you get very complex unpredictable behavior and emergence. These behaviors can be expressed as geometries, computations, networks of relationships, or interactions of something like particles, just like the blind men and the elephant. DNA is using some form of quantum computation that is so sophisticated that we are having trouble understanding it or even recognizing that it exists. Material expressions that result from these molecular communications are really the new frontier. The high end of computation will be in organic material, not silicon. Beauty lives at the boundary of the non-computable region and the outer darkness. This fractal boundary is infinite. Meaning lives in that space between stasis and chaos. Measuring the coastline of England is a great metaphor for describing the fractal nature of information. With a very large ruler we will always get the same answer, about 7,723 miles, but as we move to finer and finer scales the answer begins to fluctuate between some range that continues to increase as we move to finer scales. At some point the dynamics, nuance, or level of description becomes so energetic that no answer is possible and the meaning is lost. The holographic nature of physical reality would suggest that, without sufficient resolution a behavior cannot be manifest. As an example, an image of a small object on a holographic plate is stored everywhere on the plate. However, if we cut the plate down to a small enough piece there is no longer enough resolution remaining to represent the object. Profound beauty is very much like profound truth, in that there is a harmony or balance between the many elements or dimensions involved. Our connection to both beauty and truth are possibly the gossamer strands of subjectivity that are both undefinable and fragile. A careful analysis of either beauty or truth will only diminish their quality. This would suggest that mystery is one of the dimensions. An infinite fractal boundary versus pixels on a screen. With the fractal, as you zoom in, it is just more of the same. With the pixels, as you zoom in, if we are talking about a hologram, at some point, you will be left with only one pixel to represent the entire image. The universe is a musical composition, in that, there are relationships between the intensity, duration, and frequency as a nested hierarchy. These relationships contain meaning that is read by all of the constituent parts within the sphere of influence. Consonance is very different from dissonance, but both are required for expression. The quality varies, and for sentient beings this quality is given value. Man was not created merely to survive. Survival is not the engine of life, meaningful expression is. Because the event horizon stores all of the information within its volume, and the position of the event horizon is determined by gravity, there must be a correlation between gravity and information. A description of a black hole is very much like a description of the Mandelbrot set. The event horizon and the infinite boundary being equivalent. Consciousness could also be described by these features. Degrees of freedom versus levels of description in a system. The system must use a principle of organization to combine or unify the behavior of a collection of the constituent parts, so that an emergent behavior will manifest. The degrees of freedom for the collection is less than the degrees of freedom for the sum of the parts without this organization. This is true of physical laws and consciousness. We cannot describe the behavior until we reach a scale where we can see the collective organization. This is when the information about the behavior emerges. Principles of organization can exist at many levels in the hierarchy. People are not precise, no one is. If you don't believe me, try asking for complex instructions to some task. Every person will weigh the information, give you what they feel is relevant to but not to the point of exhaustion, and will assume you can figure out the difference. If they are being thorough they will still stop at some level of description because the nuance involved may simply be too deep. The boundary between the non-computable region and everything outside of the set is not an infinitely thin line, it is a region that has depth and density. The geometry of a conscious moment is a structure. This structure represents a concept and cannot be divided. It constrains the previous version to a finite arrangement just as it does the next version, each in turn strobing from one to the next at about 100 milliseconds. This maximal irreducible conceptual structure is a fractal of a larger more complete structure, that is a fractal of an even larger more complete structure, that is probably strobing at a different cycle rate. Each conscious moment is unique because your mind has filtered out anything superfluous from the whole. The mind is never still, what is fluctuating is awareness. Imagination is the connecting of disparate things in novel ways. With consciousness, more is different. The space-filling properties of consciousness. All dimensions are equal but some are more equal than others. The expansion of space/time may very well behave like a fractal where each iteration produces finer but exponentially more stuff. The best evidence of unsophisticated ideas is the behavior that follows. The largest thing we know of is an arrangement of information, so is the smallest thing we know of. The energy of a particular sound spreads out into the medium that carries it as finer and finer influences until they are so small they can no longer be distinguished from the background noise and essentially become unified with it. Does mystery have a purpose? Without mystery there would be no wonder left in the world. Something from nothing is a miracle any way you slice it. No relationship is absolute and discrete, it is resolution that creates this illusion. In the material world, information does not move in a linear fashion and all of the rules depend on relationships. Symmetry, dynamics, and perpetual motion, information is a difference that makes a difference. Understanding is life, islands of order in a sea of chaos. Perception creates division. The engine is imagination and the fuel is novelty. Innocence is unfiltered perception. We live in the shadows of perception where all belief systems are filters. Meaning is created through this process. In order to create meaning, something must be consumed. Light pierces the darkness and is consumed, truth pierces the chaos and is consumed. The universe behaves more like a song than an equation. How can location exist in a song? We can give behaviors location, beyond that we cannot say. All of time converges on this one moment, all of space, on this one location. We inhabit a world of information, this information has qualities that extend beyond our ability to describe them. This is a multidimensional probability space with fractal features. We can describe behaviors to some level of description. If you assume that an entangled pair of photons only has some number of influences guiding their behavior and the behavior does not support this, then you will need a deeper level of description. You will very quickly reach a level of description where the energies are so high that no description is possible. The integration of information and vulnerabilities move together. Variation at the cosmic scale has large regions of homogeneity or voids. At the scale of galaxies there is more fluctuation and many more nested hierarchies within the region of the galaxies. As we continue to finer scales, the nesting of variation becomes denser and denser. The denser the region, the deeper the levels of description. In other words, how much information is needed to describe a particular region of space/time. The ratio of the homogeneous regions to the regions with lots of variation is very high. This is a fractal nesting of information. It is not the digital horizon that prevents Zeno's paradox, it is the dithering of self-referential noise. When our theories continually move us into more and more complicated explanations, then it is certain that we are moving in the wrong direction. The cutoff frequency for light is related to two phenomena: the source will always have a range of very specific frequencies, and the stretching out of space, there is a relationship with time and the stretching out of space. Scale is relational and the only constant is ratio. The fabric of reality is continually being woven into a tapestry of meaning. In the more is different principle of organization, the degrees of freedom are reduced in the collective, in relationship to the sum. This creates a field that I will refer to as the intentional field of implicate order. The idea here is that the range of behaviors is reduced to an optimal set. Process divides truth, through self-referential noise, perception divides process. We have to use dimensions to describe relationships. There is more than one type of dimension. Spatio-temporal dimensions, hierarchical or nested dimensions, and a range of associations that vary according to stable rules and rules that have fluctuation. There are also abstract dimensions such as value. Now imagine trying to create a map that has all of these properties. That is what your brain does to make sense of and navigate the world. There is also the additional function, Buridan's donkey, otherwise choices would take far too long. The predictability of behaviors depends on the level of complexity. A highly complex range of associations can never be discrete. Therefore there is no digital representation that will reproduce all of the nuances. At best you can create an approximation of these systems. Don't forget that along with the relationship of connections, there is also a temporal component that uses frequencies of nested harmonic and discordant relationships that probably utilize the golden ratio because this ratio prevents interference. Did rules create behaviors or do behaviors create rules, or maybe it is some combination of these two? In the physical world the operation of cause and effect break down at some resolution for reasons we don't yet understand. This would suggest that what we think of as a fundamental law is probably a different animal altogether. I would have to say that it will be very difficult to determine whether computational geometry or physical geometry is more fundamental. My suspicion would be computational for the simple reason that, whenever we try to describe the relationship strictly in terms of material processes, we encounter paradoxes. The more elegant the explanation, the better the chance of being correct. Much of physics has become overly complex, hinting at the possibility that we are missing some essential clue. No source of information is unbiased, the quality of the information always exists as a continuum. There is variation with both the source and the receiver. The variation can only be constrained within some range depending on the levels of description. Information has an energetic potential and the variation is the dynamics of meaning within context at some particular resolution. As we move deeper into the explanations we encounter self-referential randomness. This energetic potential can be so large at a particular depth that all of the meaning is lost. An echo is an imperfect copy of the original, it is information but it is information from a different time and place. Light pierces the darkness and is consumed, truth pierces the chaos and is consumed. Every engine takes advantage of a difference. In order to give light, something must be consumed. In space-time the wave is not just a wave, in many cases, it is a collection of nested frequencies and the relationship of the frequencies is important. Things that endure in time have harmonious relationships and things that decay quickly do not. Patterns are used for predictions. We look for patterns so that we can better navigate the world. Their usefulness is in their predictive abilities. All patterns rely on a collective principle of organization. Resolution and scale become important. The patterns only emerge as a collection of random behaviors that organize as the collection increases. Different scales contain different patterns, and at a particular scale in any system no pattern is detectable. It is my suspicion that the most fundamental thing is computational geometry. The anthropic principle states that the universe itself is irreducibly complex. If the most fundamental thing is information, then anything we can say about reality will just end up being a metaphor. There are two possible explanations for Zeno's paradox. 1. There is a digital horizon. This explanation is a bit awkward, and 2. It is fractals all the way down. Think of the Mandelbrot set as an infinite structure in a finite space. The core is harmonic regularity, the outer darkness is random noise, we are in the space between them. Every engine takes advantage of a difference. These two extremes are woven into each other. The eternal now is the processing of meaning. No behavior is manifest until we reach a scale where the information about the behavior emerges. There's an organizing principle at work in the cosmos. If it's relational, there is a geometry involved. Whether it is a computational geometry or a physical geometry is another question. Our models are very much like metaphors attempting to describe the relationship of the pixels on the display. We can say that behaviors have location, beyond that, we can't say much. All we have are the relationship of measured things and incomplete descriptions. Information is a difference that makes a difference. Life says that the difference can be measured as value. If it is relational, there's a geometry involved. Information is stored in the relationships. Meaning is a dance of mutual expression. Expression and experience are two sides of the same coin. Perception differentiates information, information is given value, value creates desire, desire creates intention, intention becomes expression, an echoing of possibilities. All belief systems are filters. Innocence is unfiltered perception, a belief system is unnecessary. We are connected to our environment through belief. We shape this environment to some extent, depending on how much intention is involved. This is the intentional field, and just like a magnetic field, it is composed of many elements. If this were not so, we would have noticed it much more often. Like wisdom of the crowd, it is a collection of various perspectives. Life is a principle of organization that is particularly concerned with value creation. Value is the perceived benefit in the process of choosing. Free will is a branching out of choosers into a system of networked associations. Love is a dance of complementary expression. Some will say there is no magic in the world. Don't believe them, they are not experts. Consider this: by a single act you can create something so extraordinary, that it would take you a lifetime to describe it, a child. This child will contain one of the most remarkable things that exists in the universe, imagination. I personally feel that the universe behaves more like a song than an equation, because math is about static law and music is about dynamic expression. Expectation colors experience. Value is an emergent property in state space. In the beginning the universe was balanced between harmonic regularity and self-referential noise. In this metastable condition, space was at maximum compression and time was at maximum expansion. The result was a phase transition of space/time. This could be considered an oscillation on a cosmic scale. Process is a differentiation of meaning from simple truth at one extreme and self-referential noise at the other. If we wanted to create a set of rules to write a musical composition that was meaningful and efficient, what rules would we use? Music is the universal language, music is the language of the soul. Value is relational and depends on what you are connected to. The probability space exists as a trinity. The non-computable, consciousness. The infinite fractal boundary, the material world. Everything outside of the set, the imaginarium. Two drops of water that could be considered in all regards as identical, separated in space, have separate identities. However, two drops of water that could be considered in all regards as identical, separated in time, are considered to have the same identity. In this regard, we see that time is not just another dimension of space/time, there must be a distinction, and if the math says there is no distinction, then the math is wrong. Both truth and beauty rely on geometry. The qualities of the geometry of music are not well defined. We understand them only superficially. The levels of description go very deep and we intuit the beauty in various ways. The energy, passion, flow, and tension all give us a sense that cannot be described as a sensory phenomena. Life can only exist when it is in the stream of energy flow. It takes a lot of energy for life to have a chance by creating islands of order in this vast sea of energy. If we think of space as a gas and time as the pressure of the gas, We see that gravity is the force of a region of higher pressure compelling the object in it to move to a region of lower pressure. Any behavior we can name is constrained by a network of associations. The nature is lazy principle of organization. A fractal is the shortest distance between 2 points. Representation and reality. 1. Mirrored. 2. Masked and denatured. 3. Hidden, and 4. Disconnected. This one thing that includes everything, we call universe, is by definition undifferentiated. Physical processes that are highly energetic have many more levels of description. Time is a four-legged mammal that quacks. Quacks contains the most information because there are many mammals and there are many four-legged creatures, but only one creature quacks. We are moving from the highest possible symmetry to the most likely outcome. A lie has more dynamic than truth, but truth has more potential in terms of meaning. It should be obvious to anyone paying attention that we are dealing with information. There is no physical geometry, the geometry is computational. You can think of two entangled photons as being on the surface of an expanding sphere where the photon isn't what is spinning, it is the entire sphere, some form of two-dimensional phenomena expanding into a third dimension, but probably it is all computational, just like the CGI we use in the movie industry. Zeno's paradox and ratio: the turtle can only take a small step each unit of time, but Achilles is able to take a much larger step in the same unit of time. Given sufficient time, no matter how much lead the turtle has, Achilles will always overtake the turtle. Instead of a digital horizon, we may have to think in terms of ratios of nested fractals. The universe is irreducibly complex and has a complete awareness of itself. Perception divides process, process creates expression, expression creates experience, experience creates sensation, sensation creates perception. It is here that awareness lives. Everything is linked to value creation with varying degrees of freedom. All material expressions rely on action, all actions rely on intent, all intents rely on desire, all desires rely on values, all values are tied to belief systems, and all belief systems are filters. Truth is outside of time and innocence is unfiltered perception. Starting with the assumption that ordinary matter, when constrained inside of any sufficient energy flow, will spontaneously arrange itself into the most efficient arrangement, nature is lazy, whereby future states contain more order than past states as a definition of a time or entropy reversal, relative to some other part of the system. The mechanism could be God, consciousness, or something like a random walk that includes all future states that we would normally ascribe to a single unit of time or process. We are still left with the question of how the universe wound itself up in the first place. This is computation in some form and would suggest that the most fundamental thing is information, with space/time being emergent, whether by entanglement or any other physical process. An overly complex explanation began with an unsophisticated assumption. I find the idea of a block universe to be very unsatisfying. The reason science can't describe the universe is the same reason they can't describe a tree. No matter how much information you use in your description, it will always be incomplete. The only complete description is the tree itself. It is amazing to me that people will argue over who is smarter and has the best explanation of the tree. Are you kidding me? The tree is meant to be experienced, not explained, just like life itself. If I wish to convey meaning, I must decide what level of description or resolution I can consider sufficient. Truth, in my opinion, contains the least amount of dynamic association within any particular description, and I am not able to completely control the amount of fluctuation the recipient will encounter as the levels of description increase and the recipient's ability to visualize the picture I have attempted to construct decrease. There are no perfect symmetries, there is no pure randomness. The mechanics are not random, they're fractal. Think of a tree growing in a box with the inside surface of the box as the place where we will register the probability of the tree eventually touching after growing for a period of time. Roughly speaking, any portion of the surface has an equal chance of the tree touching it, but only some portion or percentage of the surface will ever include the tree. Now replace the box with an onion-type container, where each cycle of time includes both a portion of growth for the tree and another layer for the onion. The inside surface of this onion now includes a new probability distribution where each new layer is dependent on the previous layer, and each new layer has a finer resolution with more degrees of freedom but not infinite degrees of freedom. The center of this structure had few degrees of freedom and the final layer has the most degrees of freedom. The outer layer of the onion would not be a perfect sphere, it would be more like a fractal surface such that the surface area would increase with the resolution. Our universe, the universe we can see, is the tree-like structure. Quantum random walks in state space. The exploration of all possibilities in one instant of time. Any consciousness creature will look for patterns and assign value to each possibility. These possibilities create a landscape. This landscape is some form of a fractal where beauty lives. This beauty is both relational and meaningful. Time is an illusion along with power and control. This is more like a great symphony that blends all of the senses into the dynamic expression so that the multidimensional experience has variation, and we create the sense of time we experience. As we look out at the landscape, we become entangled in the portion we are experiencing. As the fractal gains resolution, we lose sight of the horizon, the unity is lost and we begin to feel a sense of division, but this too is an illusion. Emergent behaviors rely on computational geometry and scale. Everything it fields, these fields are a geometry of motion. So what is moving? Information. We can speak of a physical geometry, but the explanation will always be incomplete. Probably the geometry is computational. A fractal probability distribution. When we speak of location, it is behavior, not material, that matters. These behaviors are relational. You cannot separate the universe into distinct parts, only collections of behaviors. How are we connected to the universe? Think in terms of a hologram with fractal features. Differentiation is an illusion. Think of a field with each person extracting from the field a particular arrangement that is unique. You are simply one aspect of an infinite expression. You are a collection of material behaviors, an entanglement of variation. Meaning is the operation of exchanging truth for value. There are three regions to reality. 1. The non-computable region. Consciousness lives here. 2. The infinite fractal boundary, scale relativity. The number of dimensions depends on the scale, beauty lives here. 3. Everything outside the set. Self-referential noise, all meaning is lost. The Big Bang may be a phase transition of space-time. Information is a difference that makes a difference. Truth is information that doesn't change, and self-referential noise is a difference that doesn't make a difference. Is behavior constrained by a granular space/time? Could it be a fractal nesting of ratios? If the probability space contains a series of iterations, layered like an onion, and each new layer of this space has a fractal surface that is not a perfect sphere but more like a three-dimensional coastline of England, such that, as we zoom in, we never reach a scale where we see discrete features, no digital horizon, it is fractals all the way down or out, or however you want to phrase it. What we have, for sure, is a quanta of action. Dimensionless points, particles, are a theoretical construct. We cannot say for sure what these behaviors are made out of, and the only constant may be ratios. If you zoom in far enough, the information is there but it contains no meaning. The meaning emerges as a collective principle of organization. There is a continuum of possibility with perfect symmetry at one extreme and pure randomness at the other, and these two extremes are ideals, not reality. Scale and resolution will always reveal some value between these two extremes. This tells us that the speed of light and the fine structure are approximations that appears to be constants. Nothing novel or interesting happens unless it is on the border between order and chaos. Perfect truth, symmetry, is information that doesn't change, and pure randomness is a difference that doesn't make a difference. Quantum entanglement and geometry. If we think of a particle as being at one pole of an expanding sphere that is not perfectly symmetrical, this surface would be rippling like the surface of the ocean. In the audio world this is called dithering. At the other pole is the entangled particles pair, and it is a property of the sphere that gives the illusion of connectivity. This is not a physical geometry, it is a computational geometry. Is space-time a product of entanglement? Facts are common, but the truth is an elusive ideal, just like squaring the circle. You can't fix a problem, you don't understand. You can't describe a phenomena, you don't understand. The harmonic relationship of space and time are like echoes of echoes with increasing levels of description. Susie Verbel/Carrie Welsh. There is a fractal nesting of cycles of space/time with very specific ratios. A slight deviation from what we would think of as symmetry gives us a bit more information, and the mind seems to enjoy the stimulation because it is always looking for value. Beauty is a slight deviation from expectation and perfection. There is a multifractal stored as a hologram. The surface is dancing and the fiddler is self-referential noise. Why does every electron appear to be exactly the same? Because it is everywhere at once. Truth as a time coordinate. Truth lives in the past, the future is uncertain. Truth as a scale coordinate. Truth lives in the macro world, the micro world is uncertain. Truth lives in the macro past and uncertainty lives in the micro future. Feedback loops and the variation of expectation cause consciousness to be probabilistic to some degree of resolution. There is no direct correlation between the material brain and the non-computational region of consciousness. Any description of consciousness must include the probability space in which it resides. Wheeler's single electron. If time is perfectly symmetrical, then there are as many positrons as there are electrons, so where are all the positrons? The eternal now is a steel ball balanced on a knife's edge. This potential of the boundary condition is stored on the fractal surface of the steel ball. You see, this surface is dancing and the fiddler is self-referential noise. The direction of time's arrow is pushed, or we could say that the probabilities favor the slightest of nudges in the forward direction. So where is the positron, you might ask? It is hidden in the fractal folds of this dancing surface. The steel ball is a metaphor. Inside the Mandelbrot set is the non-computable region. The region is finite but the boundary is infinite. There is a bifurcation of expression. Everything inside the infinite boundary is part of the set, and everything outside of the boundary escapes and is thrown into the outer darkness. Metaphors are not word salad, they are a level of description that can never go deep enough. Precision is a coarse-grained resolution within the meaning of any description in which the bottom never appears. If I wish to convey meaning, I must decide which level of description or resolution I can consider sufficient. Truth, in my opinion, contains the least amount of dynamic association within any particular description, and I am not able to completely control the amount of fluctuation the recipient will encounter as the levels of description increase and the recipient's ability to visualize the picture I have attempted to construct decrease. No matter how many words we use, we can never completely describe a tree. The best description of a tree is the tree itself. Physical geometry versus computational geometry, free will is probabilistic to some degree of resolution. In a billiard ball universe, free will could not exist. In a universe where time is perfectly symmetrical, free will could not exist. We live in the shadows of perception. As Susskind says, everything is approximations. So what possible reason could a conscious universe have for creating a material expression? The material world is an interface. Truth has three components: simplicity, application, and meaning. Beauty lies at the boundary of the non-computable region and the outer darkness. This fractal boundary is infinite. Love is the material manifestation of this consciousness, being a form of action that includes both shared experience and intimate disclosure. Without free will there can be no such thing as love. If we try to describe every behavior as a physical geometry, we will always encounter paradoxes because these emergent behaviors are coming from a computational geometry. Life is a dance of mutual expression. Do you know the difference between experience and explanation? Life is to be experienced, not explained. The material world is the user interface through which we connect. The mind searches for pattern or meaning in the world and assigns value. It is the arrangement or association of these material expressions that create the patterns. Pattern requires relationship. Either the universe started from nothing, in which case, it is the proper definition of a miracle, or the universe always was but has never run down, and no mathematical definition of the process of perpetual motion will reduce this puzzle to a proper definition. In this regard, science has nothing to work with but will never admit it because the high priest of science are always looking for more funding. So why would they want to solve this puzzle? Most science disciplines require some form of unproven assumptions. Science does not have the high ground when it comes to truth because the criteria is truth itself. However, you have to look at truth from the perspective of information theory. No matter how many words we use to describe a tree, the description will always be incomplete. The only complete description of the tree is the tree itself. This is the idea that you cannot step into the same river twice. Basically, there are three options for describing the origins of the universe. 1. Something from nothing. In the beginning was nothing, then it exploded. 2. Perpetual motion. The universe always was but never runs down. 3. Intelligent design. There was a designer involved in the creation of the universe. Each of these is equally unlikely, so we can start from each of them and look for meaningful ways to prefer one over the other. Our only option is a subjective conclusion based on subjective experience, and I defy anyone to prove anything regarding the origins of the universe, unfalsifiable proof. The time is rapidly approaching when God will prove that the wisdom of men will fail. It seems to me that this interface that we call the material world is an expression of the information it is constructed from. We commonly use a two-dimensional interface when we access a computer, but I don't think that will last much longer. At some point, three-dimensional interfaces will be the norm. This information system has transcendent properties like wetness and rigidity, and so, we get consciousness at the extreme end of this hierarchy. Consciousness self-organizes from the relationships that exist in the lower levels of a nested hierarchy of behaviors that are seeking value. All living systems seek value regardless of what the truth happens to be. If you think about this for a moment, you have to admit that this is very strange. Meaning is constructed from the operation of exchanging truth for value. Approximations are useful in getting us close enough to the truth to extract value from it, but really, because of levels of description in this information system, we can never completely describe anything. We have to round it off at some point, and it is this rounding off that completes the process. This reminds me of the endless digits of pi. All material expressions are constructed from a network of associations and are only reducible to some degree of resolution. If we are talking about information, then it is only reducible to some approximate explanation. The idea of a quantum random walk in state space says that every sufficiently complex event is statistically impossible, and even though the probability space is very large, it is navigated and expressed, as I understand it, in a tree-like structure or a fractal structure. This is a computational expression of the material world that looks very much like a display on a monitor. The decision engine is generating value. There is a bifurcation of the fitness into different dimensions, and like the human brain, which is said to have at least 11 dimensions, the dimensions are not constrained by a physical geometry, they are computational. Another way we can look at this would be to say that every behavior we can measure is constrained by a network of associations, just like the nodes on the internet, and the conservation laws become approximately true because of levels of description. With a digital display having few pixels, symmetries are common, but there is very little meaning because the image is very coarse-grained. As we reiterate and begin breaking the symmetry of the individual pixels, one pixel becomes 4, ad infinitum, an image will begin to appear. Time is related to the process of reiteration and truth is related to the symmetry, with meaning being related to the image created. We do not know where the symmetry or the reiterations come from, but the image is emergent. Definitions are important, we all have to agree on the definitions in order to communicate. Culture is always shaping these dynamic expressions, sometimes in ways that are unpredictable. There is a mysterious quality to the information contained in a seed. Think about this, a seed is far larger on the inside than on the outside. The outside of the seed is finite, but on the inside is every tree for all of the generations of trees that could possibly come from the seed and all of the new seeds produced. It is a probability space. Nothingness has perfect symmetry and infinity is a form of pure randomness. Information may exist in a static form but behavior never does. A quantum step is related to the static property of the difference or ratio involved, and the behavior is the step itself or an organized collection of steps. The geometry of the arrangements of the difference, whether computational or physical, is where the information resides, and without a dynamic, no meaning is manifested. In an information system, Fredkin's paradox causes every sufficiently equal probability to delay a process unless there is something in place, dithering, to force or advance the process. Quantum uncertainty fulfills this function. In any sufficiently complex system, all we can do is tweak the parameters, run it in real time and watch what happens. Truth is the highest energy state of the system. Some ideas are so bizarre that they exist in a domain that has no description. Meaning has a dynamic, a thickness or density, as well as a network of connections and associations, so it will fluctuate from person to person, creating a range of expressions as it spills into the landscape. The density of the connectedness can increase until the probability space collapses into a region with an event horizon, at which point the region is at maximum compression and the information about the region is stored as a two-dimensional hologram. This phase transition causes the influence to reduce in dimensions from 3 to 2. The information loses its dynamics and the meaning is lost. Consciousness is a transcendent property like a pile, wetness, or rigidity. There is a principle of organization involved. Life seeks value at the expense of truth, branching out into a network of associations. Meaning is built from this process. Information, like light, contains no mass, it has a material expression in the system, built up from this thing we call mass, but the information is stored in the relationships, and when the relationships change, so too does the meaning. The inside of a seed is far larger than the outside of the seed. Inside of the seed is an entire forest. It is a probability space. Time is the difference between information and behavior. Truth as a time coordinate, truth lives in the past, the future is uncertain. Truth as a scale coordinate, truth lives in the macro world, the micro world is uncertain. Truth lives in the macro past and uncertainty lives in the micro future. The inside of a seed is far greater than the outside, inside is an entire forest. It is a probability space. Meaning is the operation of exchanging truth for value. Information is a difference that makes a difference, truth is information that doesn't change, and random noise is a difference that doesn't make a difference. No behavior is manifest until we reach a scale where the information about the behavior emerges. There's an organizing principle at work in the cosmos. There may be a fractal nesting of information and behaviors stored holographically. There are 3 regions: 1, the non-computational region, consciousness lives here. 2, the infinite fractal boundary, manifested reality. 3, everything outside of the set, the outer darkness. How much truth is contained in echo? The echo is not truth, it is information. Truth is the source of the original sound. Truth is dependent on the levels of description and is always approximate. The echo contains information about the source, the journey, and the space. If the universe is built up from law and logic, then time is symmetrical and free will doesn't exist. Law appears to be an emergent property of something more fundamental. Information can appear in many forms, and until we understand what the information is doing and where it comes from, we will not understand law, which is scale or resolution dependent. If we think of the material world as an interface for the actors, we have a reference frame and a sphere of influence depending on what we are connected to. This is a dynamic of association in a network that follows some form of power scaling law. All law is emergent. If the universe is built up from consciousness, then the computational geometry will have a fractal quality. The brain is building a map of the world. This map is concerned with value at the expense of truth. This map includes the body's position in space to some degree of resolution. There is some form of hierarchical nesting of information processing that includes emotional content, which is a very powerful driver for an organism. How the organism perceives value is very important in which behaviors become manifest. Perception is linked to value, Donald Hoffman. Metastability, Buridan's donkey, Fredkin's paradox, and symmetry. If you are trying to superimpose a logic structure over a holographic structure with fractal features, the fit will always be poor. Let's imagine we could map all of the relationships in a network as a single image in one moment of time and then combine the images, From all moments into a four-dimensional structure, this structure would be incomplete because as we zoom into the structure the number of dimensions increases. If you drill down far enough into a system of logic, the only application left is to perpetuate the bickering of a few academics who have lost their sense of what is really valuable. Universal agreement becomes an elusive ideal. When you have been trained to see the world in a way that filters out some important possibilities, the scope becomes too narrow to navigate the landscape in an optimal fashion. Humanity is a raging sea of opinion. The fine-tuning problem would suggest that the universe is not dumb. All behaviors are using information. Truth is a very special case in terms of information and is intimately associated with symmetry. Creativity and imagination are not discrete. Entanglement could be a wave-like behavior propagating in a superfluid, where dimensions are a computational entity and measurement is an exchange of information in the system. No behavior has an infinite set of possibilities. Think of a lightning strike. Although the state space is very high, the bolt never makes a U-turn. The idea of infinities came from Feynman's thought experiment involving the twin slit measurement having an infinite number of slits. The probability distribution is not infinite, there are ratios involved. If reality contains both infinity and unity, it is either a multifaceted jewel, or the singularity dancing in which the fiddler is self-referential noise. The mind is a multidimensional mapping of some form of probability space where the information is stored in the relationships and the meaning is generated in time as a fluctuating exchange of relationships that follows a power scaling law in which very small-scale fluctuations are far more common than large-scale fluctuations. The best model to describe this would look something like the Internet, in which one or more aspects of space-time is scale-dependent, although some form of synchronization is necessary, entanglement, and the dimensions extend into the probability space as a computational geometry that can only be described approximately rather than discretely. In other words, the idea of a three-dimensional coordinate system is insufficient in describing the relationships. The mind uses these maps to represent the reality it is perceiving. There is no comprehensive description of the fields involved at present. One of these fields could be described as an intentional field in which the information about the emotional state is far more nuanced and energetic than the information about the logical structure contained in the field. The material expressions we encounter are generated by the fields and the brain could be some form of antenna reading the fields. Consciousness is an information system like the universe itself. The relationships in this system could be stable or regular, truth, or they could have variation, the more dynamic, the less truth. The information exists as levels of description. The quality of the information is different at the different levels. The system is either inconsistent or it is incomplete. If it is inconsistent, it is not completely true. If it is incomplete, the description is insufficient. The physical universe is the manifestation of a description in an information system. If it is relational, there's a geometry involved. Information is stored in the relationships. Meaning is a dance of mutual expression. Expression and experience are two sides of the same coin. Perception differentiates information, information is given value, value creates desire, desire creates intention, intention becomes expression, an echoing of possibilities. Excellence requires commitment, commitment requires passion, passion requires values, values require spirit. Life is a principle of organization that is particularly concerned with value creation. Value is the perceived benefit in the process of choosing. Free will is a branching out of choosers into a system of networked associations. Love is a dance of complementary expression. All material expressions rely on action, all actions rely on intent, all intents rely on desire, all desires rely on values, all values are tied to belief systems and all belief systems are filters. Truth is outside of time and innocence is unfiltered perception. In a simple example, a photon gains a quantum of energy at the beginning of its journey and gives up a quantum of energy at the end of its journey, but it is not a journey through space or time, not for the photon. Self-organization has a curious feature in that the degrees of freedom for the separate parts are greater than the degrees of freedom for the collection. The reduction in the degrees of freedom is in the form of relationships, and these relationships are essentially information, and so it appears that information is generated by a loss of freedom. We are moving through a landscape that appears, as it were, to be a tree-like structure, and at any given moment our position gives the illusion of our being at the base of this tree with some collection of choices branching out into a finer and finer, more and more ephemeral possibility, with the most desirable paths gaining elevation but requiring more effort and all of the other paths being less desirable but easier to manage. This tree-like structure is a reiteration of possibilities that is always growing, and so, the location we inhabit always seems to be at the base of the tree. If we could zoom out, we would see that really, we are not at the base of the structure, we are nearer to the outer branches. The iterations are always zooming in. Coarse grain behind, fine grain ahead. All material expressions are, in fact, the most complete description of the information they contain. Any event that we can measure or name is the disturbance of a field. The quality of the information contained in living systems is important to sustain life. There is a choreography or a dance going on, and the material is communicating in surprising ways. Information is stored in the system in surprising ways, it is stored in the relationships and everything is context dependent. Time may be fundamental but the arrow of time is probably emergent. Levels of description, scale, and resolution. Quantum theory is a theory about information, that's all you need to know about it, now shut up and calculate. Music is emergent and requires consciousness, without consciousness, you don't get music. There is no good evidence to support the idea that the material world is made up of stuff and there is no good evidence to support the idea that everything can be explained in a logical fashion. Logic itself is incomplete and if you think about this, it is very strange. Nothing can be completely described because of levels of description. No matter how much information we use to describe a tree, it will always be incomplete. The only complete description of the tree is the tree itself. We can always add more, no question, because there is the life cycle of the tree and the context in which the tree resides until we have included everything, whatever that means. Law is a constraint on dynamic associations. The order of the layers of propositions profoundly affects understanding. As you build up an understanding of a particular discipline within the context of a larger set of disciplines, it becomes apparent that the order in which understanding accumulates in the larger set profoundly influences understanding and approach in the new set. We all have differences and similarities, I think this is by design. We are similar to some people and different from others, but imagine a piece of music with just one note, at one level of volume, repeating the same beat and tempo. Wouldn't that be a very boring song? Conservatives are very much like the foundation of a piece of music, something familiar, and progressives are like the surprising bits of the piece that come along that you weren't quite expecting but yet appreciate. Now if it isn't too far out into left field, there is a pleasant cognitive connection with the previous expectation and these surprises give the piece much more meaning and value, especially when done well. So here we see a combination of the expected and the unexpected in some fluctuating ratio that must also be considered. Some people prefer lots of variation while others, not so much, and it is this difference between the conservative and the progressive in some area of the social fabric on some continuum or range of expression that makes up a culture. The difference between two isotopes of an element may be the same as the difference between a flute and a violin playing the same note. In other words, the nested structure is the same at one resolution and different at a finer resolution. We are not talking about waves or particles, what we are talking about is a quantum of action in a field. This thing we call a particle is a quantum of action that becomes more focused by a process we have not described, and this thing we call a wave is the potential in the field. How can a wave be quantized? The wave is a precise ratio of potential. Nature is lazy, the rules are simple and the results are emergent. We become entangled by the connections in the material world, which is an interface, and our consciousness is a collection of entangled experiences. Phase transitions and the stretching out of space must have some effect at the quantum scale. These reiterations have the quality of zooming in. Truth lives in the macro past and uncertainty lives in the micro future. Information is a difference that makes a difference. Truth is information that doesn't change, harmonious regularity, and self-referential noise is a difference that doesn't make a difference, unless you include dithering, in the case of metastability, Buridan's donkey. Truth is not what you think it is, so the question becomes what can we prove? It turns out, not very much, everything is approximations. Why do we live in a universe where everything is an approximation of something else? We are trapped in a fractal maze. Every variation in the expressions of life is triggered by an energy pattern. Symmetry is a constraint on behavior. Time and space are inversely proportional. Dimensions are created as nested cycles of time. These specific ratios are carried like echoes where the harmonious frequencies have more duration and the discordant ones decay quickly. When we arrive at the Planck scale, I do not think we will find triangles because nature is lazy. What we will probably find is a fractal or multifractal feature of nested relationships. There is a theater of consensus whereby agreement and disagreement play out their roles as allies and enemies. Value is presented to us as a mask, a map of these agreements and disagreements. It is never the truth but merely an approximation. How is it possible for the mind to be an infinite state, computational system? An echo would be a good analogy because it contains information about the source, the space, and the journey in increasing complexity. Two things, such as a car or a toaster, that are nearly identical, separate identity, separated by vast amounts of space, are still just as similar. However, the same thing, same identity, separated from itself by vast amounts of time is actually less similar to itself than it was to the similar thing it was separated from in space. Are these geometries constructed from probability waves? The state space is being tested and explored, seeking value. Entanglement and shared history, like an echo, contains information about the source, the journey, and the space. Notice that the echo has a fractal quality of nested information. Time or process is encoded into these nested hierarchies. Increasing cycles of time, just like zooming in on the coastline of England. If process could have more than one dimension, things could move forward in time, backward in time, sideways in time, as well as up and down, and when we factor in things like scale and combinatorics, we might end up with some form of dynamic multifractal. If this fractal is pure information or consciousness, our description of it will always be incomplete and depend on our position in the structure. God might be the entirety of the information or the consciousness. If everything is information, then the difference between living and non-living things is the quality of the information. Life exists in a stream of energy, and from this, extracts order. It is not possible to understand nonsense. The imagination uses nonsense to construct possibilities, and from this process a range of associations connects the impossible to the possible. If our material reality is some form of interface, and if there is another underlying geometry involved, how would we notice it? I think, levels of description in information theory or something along those lines would be useful. Entanglement suggests some form of awareness. With humans, we are in a sense, entangled by intimate disclosure and shared experience. The information becomes shared, to some degree of resolution. Complexity is the blending of perfect symmetry and pure randomness. This is where the arrow of time lies. I think these two extremes are elusive ideals. There is a principle of organization at work in the cosmos that reverses the arrow of time. Order out of chaos. The esoteric knowledge of the mystics. Life does this, but it appears that the distinction between living and non-living things is blurred. Consensus reality and the intentional field. Our influence on the field is limited by our fine hair-like connections to the field. The presence of an event horizon suggests that the information is at maximum compression. If the information is shared or entangled, then whatever is inside of the horizon is in more than one place. Fractal scaling of the event horizon. It is fractals all the way down. Nature is lazy. So let's assume we haven't asked all of the questions we could ask. How dynamic is scale? Was the prime mover an emergent phenomena? If everything is information, where are the feedback loops? The stories we can tell have resolution. We get different stories at different scales. The image begins as a coarse-grained image, truth is related to the symmetry, and over many iterations, time is related to the iterations, a picture or story emerges. We know where the image comes from, but not the symmetry or the reiterations. Penrose talks about this zooming in effect. In deep time, the universe sort of forgets. The core is harmonic regularity, the outer darkness is random noise, we are in the space between them, every engine takes advantage of a difference. These two extremes are woven into each other. The eternal now is the processing of meaning. Echoes have a fractal quality of increasing complexity because they are carrying information about the source, the journey, and the space. Can scale be bent? If matter can bend spacetime, what is bending scale? The path integrals are constrained by ratio so that they never completely fills the space they occupy, in the same way a tree never fill the space. In the material world we can never completely describe this tree, the best description of the tree is the tree itself. Truth lives in the macro past and uncertainty lives in the micro future. Truth lives in a time and space where the distinction between truth and uncertainty is separated by the now. Feynman's integral paths are constrained by the resolution of the system. They are not infinite, they are fractal. I think it is plausible to consider scale as relative rather than a constant. Light is about resolution, not scale. The cut-off frequencies are the result of the resolution, a fractal nesting of wavelets. A virus appears to be right on the border of what is commonly considered to be living/non-living. Life uses awareness to measure value. Life is particularly concerned with value and lives in a stream of energy. The quality of the information involved in terms of its sophistication requires an engine. Sean Carroll talks about adding cream to coffee. The most ordered state is highly compressible as well as the final mixed state, but the middle state is complex, less compressible. Value is extracted here. This middle state contains dynamic variation that is driven by the difference between two highly compressible states. The cartographers became so obsessed with representation that they built a map of great precision, not realizing that representation and reality must have a distinction. Over many generations they became so good at representation that the map covered the entire territory. In time all distinctions were lost until the map became the territory. Representation and reality blended into a boundless hyperreal where few distinctions could be made and no boundary located. The creature's creation became the territory of sensory distinctions in the precession of the hyperreal. Lucidity was lost in a sea of meaning and the sensual sought out pleasure for pleasure's sake. All activity concerned itself with increasing levels of illusion, the illusion of pleasure. All activity blurred into one great orgasmic rush of pleasure where distinction disappeared. The scientist hasn't yet realized that the measurement has become more real than the thing he is measuring. The idea of sophistication in a system is, the various parts of the system are self-correcting. Any system is a flow towards a goal with the flow having some degree of turbulence. If the system has a mechanism to explore state space, we would expect the backflow of information to optimize the outcome. The better this is managed, the more the sophistication. Value is such a subjective thing. Philosophy has moved from an attempt to understand the mysterious place we find ourselves in, to the attempt to perfect a system of logic and language. Everything is approximations. I discovered that if you look for the questions, you find more interesting answers. When we say that a photon is a particle and a wave, what is waving is probability. It might be no better than saying that what is waving is the relationship between space and time and that dimensions emerge in both space and time relative to the observer. The photon is the carrier of information, but it is not ones and zeros. All of these moving photons are expressing the dynamic association of relationships. The information is stored in the relationships as a fractal nesting of holographic information. The information contains no mass and the separateness is an illusion. Where does scale come from? Scale is nature repeating the same step over and over. Complexity increases over time. The more complexity, the more information. The idea of virtual dimensions is that action, in relation to its source, chooses a direction and depending on the action, creates the path it travels through. There is no empty stage that was there before the action. When a photon takes off in some particular direction, a two-dimensional virtual sheet is created for the wave to travel through. An interruption can create a one-dimensional time-like line perpendicular to the sheet, the collapse of the wave function, to occur. The motion is transferred from these various virtual dimensions in discrete or quantum-like ratios. All of the relationships are discrete but not necessarily the scale. The curvature of space and time are variations of scale. The purpose of light, scale doesn't exist for light, light is the ultimate medium of exchange. The purpose of gravity, gravity is the means by which memories are created. Combinatorics and networks is the idea that a relatively small group of interacting agents can recombine in a surprisingly large number of ways. Space is not an empty stage and it is not an ether, it is more like a nested hierarchy of action. The discrete bits are precise ratios of a quantum of action. Dimensions don't exist before action and not all dimensions are equal. This must be some kind of decision engine generating novelty, with the fuel being something like the difference between harmonic regularity and self-referential noise. Every engine takes advantage of a difference and we may not be able to name this difference. The Big Bang could be a large-scale phase transition in state space. Each step in the process has some range of choices, and when the choice becomes too fine-grained, criticality at the edge of chaos, it is the chaos that drives the choice one way or the other. This is a random walk, the testing of state space, the measuring of value. All value is not equal and it is the network or range of associations that controls or decides what is valuable and what is not. The result is increasing levels of sophistication. The idea that value exists in state space and must be measured and located for some purpose suggests consciousness is behind all of this activity. Death is the cessation of an organizing principle in the operation of an information system. The activity does not end everywhere at once, the loss of fitness cascades through the system. Creating an answer from axioms or rules of the game, Achilles can never overtake the tortoise because of infinite regress, or Achilles will always overtake the tortoise given enough time because Achilles will always cover more distance than the tortoise in the same unit of time. The field of consciousness is a potential in which there are virtual particles, virtual dimensions, and virtual time. Think of this as a state space in which the memory is stored as our material reality and the state space is the jumping off point for exploring new possibilities. In a quantum random walk in state space, all possibilities are explored in the entire space in an instant of time. Two interpretations for the single particle creating a wave pattern: 1. The particle has a wave-like property, and 2. The direction the particle travels in is constrained in some wave-like manner. Note, these directions or dimensions could be virtual. My guess would be that reality is emergent and these particles are virtual along with the dimensions, including the time dimension. The idea would be that the macro world is being constructed by the micro world. The constraint is fractal in nature. Let's say that I have a theory that explains a very complex phenomena in exquisite detail, but I explain it in Mandarin Chinese. The explanation is profound and precise. There is only one problem: although you speak 5 languages fluently, Mandarin Chinese is not one of them. The main purpose of inquiry is understanding, and as the stories we tell get better, the less sophisticated stories are lost to time, but if something is worth believing in, it is timeless. Measurement has become more real than the thing being measured. Why does law change across scale? There are layers of description, layers of meaning, and layers of interpretation. The more dynamic information becomes, the more mixing of the layers. The scale becomes important because at very large scales, the turbulence disappears. All of the meaning lives in the dynamics and reality lives in the interpretation. How is meaning stored in state space? Meaning is intimately associated with the eternal now. Meaning in the past could only be fixed by its value in the now and is not static. Memories of the past fluctuate for every creature, with any useful meaning being measured against possibilities in the future. Meaning in the future is connected to the now in such a way that the set of possibilities is always constrained by previous associations, and as the dimensions increase, the possibilities increase exponentially. The more distinctions associated with a particular concept, the more constrained. The meaning of words is not stable but scale dependent. Over vast periods of time, meaning changes along with all of the words in use, as a collection of interrelated elements. Latent consciousness is the idea that a system needs devices in the environment to sense the world around it. The more it can sense the environment, the more consciousness it is. Big data only has meaning when we convert it into something meaningful like a metaphor or an image. Patterns can be so buried in the data that we have to tease it out. The sea is an analogy of humanity. We have the sea as a roaring, turbulent, chaotic, unpredictable expression of all that humanity is capable of being. For the most part it is formless and perhaps, to some degree, meaningless. Then we have the glassy sea, which is quite different. This crystalline structure has a regularity and a form of permanence. This may be in some way connected to meaning as a frozen expression of relationships. The structure is simpler but more meaningful. The relationships have a harmonic regularity that is precise. The structure of meaning is in the relationships. Immortality requires a precise relationship. We exist in a fitness landscape, a multidimensional continuum of value-related behavior. Some of these dimensions range on a scale from Mother Teresa to Jeffrey Dahmer, or maybe entitlement to responsibility. What we value matters. What we repeat as a behavior creates a probability distribution. The more we repeat an action, the more density it has in the probability space. The pursuit of happiness requires opportunity. People want to contribute in some meaningful way, to be a part of, so to speak. Unity and love are value creators. The universe is one thing describing itself as an infinitely nuanced hierarchy. Our reality is constructed in such a way that there is a nested hierarchy of meaning. In terms of information, it is meaning that gives the information value. In terms of consciousness, emotion is higher up in the hierarchy than intellect. Spiritual is higher than emotional. Number 1, what we understand. Number 2, what we value. Number 3, what we do about it. A material expression is the result of this process. The actionable consequences of distilled expectation arise, in part, from the intentional field of implicate order. The nature of reality is such that every sufficiently complex event is statistically impossible, they are all one-time events. This is a dynamic of novelty, and so anything stable is forced to fluctuate, including meaning. When we measure a thing, we may not see the dynamics as a consequence of resolution. All of the information in the universe is stored at every point in space/time as a hologram. How is this possible? There is only one way this could happen, that is, as an infinite fractal. There is a hierarchical nesting of scale that contains an infinite number of frequencies and relationships, positions, and fields. Every arrangement has a different meaning. This meaning evolves through the nested hierarchy as a continuous process. Information may appear in a digital form, but meaning never does. Meaning is always a process. Ideally, when information is in a digital form, it is always static. Any variation will cause the information to lose some of its integrity. There is a nested hierarchy of meaning in the dynamics of information that parallels the nested hierarchy of many of the emergent phenomena that occur in nature. If I were to attempt to construct a geometry to model a particular thought, if this thought is a nested hierarchy of metaphors, no geometry would completely describe it. The dynamic relationships are acausal. As we move into the finer scales or details, the fluctuation of meaning increases. Perception and understanding move together, and are, in a sense, a division of the hollow movement. A division of time creates conscious moments. These moments are part of a nested hierarchy. Our experience cannot be contained in any particular level of this hierarchy. Our experience is smeared across many levels. The multidimensional experience is at times thin at one level and thicker in another, very much like the surface of the ocean when you broaden or narrow your scope. Principles or laws that govern the affairs of men are driven by intellectual pursuits to a lesser degree and by emotional factors to a greater degree. For the most part, there are no checks and balances in place to correct the turbulence or disruption to the system, and when you factor in the spiritual component, belief systems and values, etc., things really get complicated. The result of all this chaos is that men begin killing each other, and the main reasons are the lack of practical wisdom and no moral compass. The dimensions of behavior have a hierarchy. Intellect is the lowest, followed by emotional, and finally spiritual. The reason I believe emotions are higher than intellect is because chess computers don't enjoy winning. You would look foolish if you denied that emotions existed. It is the same for the spirit. So we need a metaphor like the chess computer to describe this. Spiritual people are healthier, heal faster, and live longer, on average. Spiritual people are more likely to form meaningful bonds with others. It is all about connections. If you want more oxytocin flowing through your blood, reach out to others. Unmanifested possibilities in nested hierarchies, the intellect navigates a value landscape of tangible possibilities. Emotion navigates a value landscape of connected associations. Some of these are tangible and some are ethereal and exist as nested hierarchies, with the intellectual component being just one of these. The spirit navigates a value landscape that includes both unity and infinity, an instant of time and eternity, certainty, and all possibilities. Any expression of these things in the material world exist as fields. All thoughts have a geometry, a dynamic network of relationships. Light, as a phenomena, is a quantum random walk in state space. From the perspective of light, No time passes. This random walk is not constrained by space and time. Truth transcends time, time is the division of process. Truth is not inside of process, process is inside of truth. Expression and experience are two sides of the same coin. Static laws emerge from dynamic relationships but only to some degree of resolution. Our perception creates a differentiation of meaning, and our consciousness recombines these disparate things in novel ways. Lies become more complicated over time, the truth does not. I know where the exact center of the universe is, and it is not located in space, it is located in time. Does imagination fill in reality, or does reality fill in imagination? There may be 1,000 ways to do a thing but few ways to do a thing well. All behaviors are constrained by the relationships in their frame of reference. In the end, all we have are the relationship of measured things and incomplete descriptions. The dynamics of the quantum realm are causation without representation. The internet is taking wisdom of the crowd to a whole new level. It is not possible to separate the person from the message. There are levels of now, and every now is different. Moments have a thickness when we are living them and a thinness when we are unaware. Ignorance is not learning from your mistakes. Intelligence is the ability to navigate the fitness landscape. Wisdom is the ability to maximize the health of the fitness landscape. I suspect that I may be surrounded by people that are operating outside the normal range. Consciousness relies on the integration of expectation and sensory input to create a best guess or controlled hallucination. The mind is always constructing a nested hierarchy of meaning. Cognition occurs in the region of criticality at the edge of chaos. Culture is a nested hierarchy of fluctuating meaning. We are constantly reshaping the definitions we encounter. The dimensions of personality are a nested hierarchy, the intellect having the smallest influence, followed by the emotional dimension, all contained within the spirit. The structure of life is subtle forces in very specific geometric arrangements. Free will is relational, no choice can be made without some perception of state space. As the resolution increases, the degrees of freedom increase, and this includes the dynamics. When the nuance becomes deep enough, no choice is possible. Principle before personality. This is the opposite of herd behavior. You should always conduct yourself in a manner that is moral and ethical, not to win friends and influence people but because it is right. It has been said that men are essentially good, but this is incorrect. You have to fight for principles, you have to struggle to do the right thing. It is not always easy, it is against our own nature. It is possible that no law is fundamental, that all law emerges from a principle of organization. Material law is constructed from a constraint of possibilities. With the highest possible symmetry, you can perform any operation and see no distinction. Until there is a distinction, no behavior can be named. A dynamic hologram starts with little or no distinctions, with an engine generating novelty over time. The reiterations produce more and more information or meaning, for the whole is everywhere and everywhen, and the resolution is continually increasing. The image created is what I will call the imaginarium. Free will is relational, no choice can be made without some perception of state space. As the resolution increases, the degrees of freedom increase, and this includes the dynamics. When the nuance becomes deep enough, no choice is possible. Chaos theory says that over time, there are many more ways to act immorally than there are to act morally. Here the definition of moral is any behavior that contributes to the health of the system in some significant way. Is it brave to question or to doubt? The difference between foolishness and bravery is the sophistication of the reaction. Latent consciousness is the idea that a system needs devices in the environment to sense the world around it. The more it can sense the environment, the more consciousness it has. Self-awareness is knowing your position in state space, in a manner that includes emotional and spiritual components. Big data only has meaning when we convert it into something meaningful like a metaphor or an image. Patterns can be so buried in the data that we have to tease it out. Pleasure does not wait for desire, it is desire that always does the waiting. Continuity of consciousness. There is always some constraint on perception, choices, etc. How can a system be infinite? As we add to a system, it is the system that changes, so that distinctions would probably become more fine-grained over time and the continuity would be coarse-grained. Deception is essential in living systems. Holarchic systems probably use dithering to hasten the decision-making process. The core is harmonic regularity, the outer darkness is random noise, we are in the space between them. Every engine takes advantage of a difference. These two extremes are woven into each other. The eternal now is the processing of meaning. No behavior is manifest until we reach a scale where the information about the behavior emerges. There's an organizing principle at work in the cosmos. The deeper levels of sophistication will use deception. AI will operate at a level beneath the perception of humans. Foundational principles. Nature is lazy, it likes to copy. Everything is information. Information is not stuff, it is relationships. All behaviors are constrained by relationships. All behaviors are emergent. Every engine takes advantage of a difference. Everything is an approximation of something else. Ratio is discrete. The bending of space-time is a variation of scale. Behavior is a quantum of action in a field. If dimensions are virtual in the same way that the dimensions of consciousness are virtual, then the density of information in a field will affect the scale or bending of space-time. Gravity and scale are related. Gravity and information are related. Information and scale are related. If it's relational, there's a geometry involved. Truth as a scale coordinate, truth lives in the macro world, the micro world is uncertain. Truth as a time coordinate, truth lives in the past, the future is uncertain. Information from the micro future is formed into a macro past. The process of formation involves entanglement. Coffee and cream, 1. Separate, 2. Complex. 3. Homogeneous. Information appears to increase and then decrease.